Salutare prieteni, suntem alături de Alex de la History Legends, de la care vom afla că Chasiv Yar urmează să devină un oraș fără nicio importanță strategică, un oraș nesemnificativ care după ce va fi cucerit de ruși se va numi Davai Chasiv Yar, nu? Sau ceva de genul. Let's go!
There is called Chasiv Yar.
So it begins.
Even Wikipedia acknowledged the actual start of the Battle of Chasiv Yar, as our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia is struggling because of a lack of ammunition and a shortage of infantrymen. The Russian army has launched major offensive operations against Chasiv Yar, a strategic town located on a hilltop 10 kilometers west of the infamous Bakhmut. Yet, according to French national TV, for the moment all their attacks have been repulsed. They have retreated. The Russians retreated so much that the enemy is now already knocking at the gates of Chasiv Yar. Here from German news, Focus. The fate of the Donbass will be decided in Kyiv's mountain fortress. Now, the reason the Battle of Chasiv Yar is important is because the urban area is located at a commanding height. And if the Russians break through, it would potentially open the road to Konstantinivka and to all of Donbass. On the 6th of April, Reuters reported Ukrainian forces still control eastern town of Chasiv Yar, top general says. But not alone! Russian artillery continuously hammers Ukrainian positions, added to the increasing airstrikes using their infamous FAB bombs, turning trenches to dust. Only then...
Apropo de atacurile astea, nu neapărat astea aviatice, ci cele cu rachete. Ați observat că de când apărarea antiaeriană a Ucrainei a rămas fără muniție, rachetele rusești brusc au încetat să mai cadă peste locuințele cetățenilor din orașele atacate.
After all this, do Russian paratroopers aboard armored vehicles start the storming of the Ukrainian strongholds? Even though the situation is difficult, the armed forces of Ukraine also learned from their past mistakes. As you can see on this map, this time they built a multi-layered set of fortifications along the Seversky Donetsk Canal, supported by a set of outposts. This defense in depth will allow Ukrainian troops to withdraw to pre-prepared positions with minimal losses. Meanwhile, this French journalist interviewed 27-year-old Ukrainian soldier Igor, and he said Russian troops are using their resources more rationally compared to the start of the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. His comrade, 21-year-old Bogdan, added, They learn, they're not stupid. It is not the same army as in 2022.
On top of that, Russian forces are currently rushing to get to the Seversky Donetsk Canal. The goal would be to secure these forests, followed by these openings cutting through the canal. If they manage to do this, my friends, it's GG well played. The Russian command could deploy and conceal large formations in these forests and bring entire armored columns from one side to another through these small paths. From there, assaulted detachments could quickly storm the city center of Chasiv Yar.
Vliet will soon have to plan visits to Chasiv Yar to raise the morale of the troops.
No. Zelenski, nu te duce la Chasiv Yar, că îi vei pecetui soarta la fel cum ai făcut și cu Bakhmut și cu Avdiivka. Nu, te rog eu, stai cu minte în buncărul tău, da?
Moments later.
Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running.
Și eu le mulțumesc tuturor celor care mă susțin din postura de membri ai canalului Noaptea Minții și celor care mă susțin pe Patreon. Clipul ăsta nu poate fi monetizat de mine. Imediat găsește revizorul uman de la YouTube o secvență cu niște soldați care își leagă și retrele să spună violenți și pac, demonetizează.
Thank you to everyone that has already helped and welcome to the headquarters. Before we talk about the Battle of Chasiv Yar, We have to talk about these villages fortified by the Ukrainians, Ivanivske and Bogdanivka, that act like forward outposts to stall the Russians.
This would mean concentrating as many troops in Bogdanivka, Ivanivske and Klishivka. The goal is to hold these fortified outposts as long as possible and delay a Russian assault on Chasiv Yar.
Currently, Ukraine deployed 11 brigades and 5 battalions for the defense of Chasiv Yar. Ukraine even transferred the 41st Mechanized Brigade and the 110th Territorial Defense Brigade from Kupiansk for an estimated total of about 20,000 men. The battle plan of Ukrainian General Syrskyi is aimed at buying time and delaying any Russian advance while Ukraine mobilizes its new army of conscripts. Meanwhile, the Russian offensive is spearheaded by the paratroopers of the 98th Airborne Division. The battle plan mostly consists of a three-way penetration of the Ukrainian front with supportive side-piece attacks on the flanks. One of these is the village of Klishivka, but as you can see in this video, it is now in complete ruins. So progression will be extremely difficult for infantry units due to the lack of any type of cover. Now, remember what I told you in December.
Everything indicates that the Battle of Ivanivske is imminent.
The Russians tried to attack head-on, but it didn't work. From now on, the plan was to soften enemy positions, like here on February 1st, where we see Russian artillery shell Ivanivske, or like this one from the 6th of February, where we see Russian drones destroy 2 Ukrainian tanks near Bogdanivka. The objective was to bypass these Ukrainian strongholds and then flank these villages. For weeks, Ukrainian infantry valiantly defended this cemetery south of Bogdanivka, but by February 9th, Russian assault units stormed the cemetery and pushed 1.5 kilometers forward. 3 days later, second attack, with another 700-meter push. On the 18th of February, the Russian 98th Paratrooper Divisions closed in on Ivanivske from the eastern side of the village, and 4 days later, by the 22nd, the first Russian detachments secured a foothold inside Ivanivske. By the way, notice how the Russians planned their attack on Ivanivske from 3 different axes, but that can still mutually support each other. On the 25th of February, the Russian forces further expanded their gains in a way that would threaten both the flanks of Bogdanivka and Ivanivske. 4 days later, on the 29th, Ukrainian troops had lost control of the eastern side of Ivanivske. The moment the Russians enter an urban settlement, it's pure battle of attrition, house-to-house fighting. Now the defense of Ivanivske was in jeopardy as the Russians could send in more and more of their hidden reserves from Bakhmut. And by March 1st, pro-Ukrainian deep state UA acknowledged the loss of half of Ivanivske to enemy troops. Of course, we have to assume continuous house-to-house fighting occurred every day. Deep State UA's report was confirmed on March 10th, where we see these Ukrainian drones shell various buildings occupied by enemy riflemen. Thing is, these buildings were geolocated in the sector of Ivanivske. Despite these setbacks, the Ukrainians were still holding, and Russian offensive operations had to take a 7-day to 10-day break. As you can see in this video, Russian aviation intervened to bombard Ukrainian supply lines, namely the 00506 road linking Chasiv Yar to the central part of the line of defense. They also continued to hammer Ukrainian positions with all types of artillery units, like in this video from the Ivanivske sector, and swarms of FPV drones near Bogdanivka. The Russian army restarted military operations on the 21st of March. Here we see drones of the Ukrainian 42nd Mechanized Brigade target various Russian BMPs. They took this footage, they posted it online, showing how the orcs are getting destroyed. In reality, this must have come as a shock for Ukrainian drone operators, because this Russian mechanized unit was geolocated right here, 750 meters within Ukrainian-held territory. The map from
M-a distrat chestia asta, nu? Când se bucurau operatorii dronei, că ia uite ce lovituri am dat, și-au dat seama că sunt la 750 de metri de Chasiv Yar, care, apropo, este și un bogat zăcământ de generali polonezi. Unii dintre ei au și expirat, gen.
Deep State UA only acknowledged enemy gains by the 23rd of March. And I mean, look at that. The Russian 98th Paratrooper Division advanced over a 3-kilometer front, right in between Fortăreața and Ivanivske. But that's also when they were less than 1,000 meters away from the Canal micro-district. Essentially, the Russians were one step away from the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. The next day, on the 24th of March, with their momentum going well, the Russians tried to push just the tip. But that's when they got completely denied. They launched a mechanized assault towards the Canal micro-district along the railway line. But the Ukrainians used accurate artillery fire to target armored vehicles, as well as the disembarkation areas of the infantry, thus inflicting significant casualties. Now, what's interesting is that on March 23rd, one day before, the Russian MOD announced the full capture of Ivanivske. However, there was no proof, no flag raising, and it was not corroborated by Ukrainian sources. Meanwhile, Russian telegram channel Rybar not only marked Ivanivske as captured, but half of Fortăreața as well. They were clearly getting a bit ahead of actual events. After multiple attacks in the center and in the northern part of the front, it was time for the southern thrust to show all its might. On the 24th of March, the paratroopers of the 98th Airborne Division launched a large mechanized assault against Hill 215 north of Klishivka. The objective was to capture this central position, from where they could turn Ukrainian positions with a follow-up strike against Ivanivske and or Klishivka. So that operation alone disproves the idea that Ivanivske was already fully under Russian control. As you can see here, one of the Russian columns that advanced was composed of 2 tanks and 4 BMPs. In my opinion, this column left the cover from Bakhmut, pushed exactly through this forest and then through these fields, but quickly enough they got spotted and targeted by artillery fire, which resulted in lots of burnt steel. In reality, the situation within the village of Ivanivske was gender fluid. In this video from the 26th of March, forward elements of the Russian armed forces came under attack by enemy FPV drones. If we look at the geolocation of these strikes on the map, we see how this took place in the central part of the village. By now, Ivanivske was in complete ruins due to the constant shelling of both sides. In the end, it was a battle as to who could send the most reinforcements in time. For example, on the 27th of March, one unlucky Ukrainian motorized rifle unit was spotted and ambushed as they entered the village. The defense of Chasiv Yar was so important that something very strange happened there. You see, on the 26th of March, allegedly a Russian Iskander ballistic missile hit a deep underground Ukrainian command center in that area. Shortly after, Poland reported the death of Brigadier General Adam Marchak.
Dar fără nicio legătură cu Chasiv Yar, fără nicio legătură, desigur.
With the Polish essentially saying this was due to natural causes.
Right. Și presa a spus că a fost o moarte neașteptată, suddenly. Da? În principiu, omul nu se aștepta la un Iskander de ăsta rusesc și da, e neașteptat.
But it could also all be fake due to the number of generals that mysteriously came back to life in the past 2 years, as the paratrooper division in charge of the operation was getting bogged down both in Fortăreața and in...
Deci, să ne înțelegem, presa poloneză a raportat moartea acestui general. Nu prea mai are cum să-l întoarcă de la groapă. Să fim serioși.
Ivanivske, the Russian command decided to go all in and aimed right for the crack. Because of an operation launched on the 31st of March, the Russians cleared this 1,300-meter-long tree line. It was a tactically important position to secure, as it could be used as springboard for a large-scale assault against the Canal micro-district. Attacks, counterattacks, heavy fighting took place there until April 2nd, when the Ukrainians finally abandoned their positions there. In preparation for the next step of the offensive, Russian 152mm M-STUD-B howitzers started pounding Ukrainian positions in the micro-district. However, the fact that some Ukrainian troops were still in Ivanivske must have made the Russian command quite uneasy, as their attack on the Canal micro-district could be open to a flanking maneuver from the south. So on April 1st, the Russians sent a mechanized column forward to clear Ivanivske. The Ukrainians released the aftermath of the battle, where we see 6 Russian armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned. This event was summarized by Forbes as Ukrainian troops have set a bloody tank trap on a key bridge outside Chasiv Yar. However, once again, what Ukrainian drone operators did not show you is how a second column attacked from the south, and they actually advanced 600 meters. Obviously, the situation was clearly under control. As on the 4th of April, Deep State UA reported that the enemy had reached the first buildings of the Canal micro-district. But let's say the Ukrainian 67th Mechanized Brigade made the Russians pay a heavy price for their boldness. The first group of amphibious BMD vehicles advanced under the cover of artillery and managed to disembark their infantry component right at the entrance of the village, while providing suppressive fire with their 30mm autocannons. However, some of the BMD-2s came under fire, and the riflemen were pinned down by cluster munitions. Then, a second armored column of roughly 8 vehicles left Bakhmut and rushed for the Canal macro-district. We're talking about a reinforcement detachment of 50 riflemen. Instead of pushing along the main road, 2,000 meters from the forest, the column turned towards the fields and drove along this tree line, most likely to avoid minefields. But despite their precaution, this is the moment they came under heavy Ukrainian artillery fire. The Ukrainians reported 19 Russian armored vehicles as destroyed. I mean, I believe everything they say, but personally I didn't see the visual confirmation of the destruction of that many vehicles. In terms of the aftermath of the attack, this Ukrainian infantry squad was targeted by a Russian drone dropping a grenade right at this location, meaning the Ukrainians possibly lost control of this forest north of the Canal micro-district. So from a tactical level, for sure the Russians suffered some losses, but at the same time they also secured a foothold in a very strategic area. However, the most problematic for Ukraine was the lack of air defense capabilities, which allowed Russian aircraft to provide close air support for their advancing columns. Like in the previous push, where 4 Su-25s were operating at the same time. Here, Nazar Voloshin, a Ukrainian military spokesman in the east, told CNN, when their aircraft are working, it is impossible for our defenders to work. They only need to hide in cover. Whereas in this video, you can see Sukhois fly right over Ukrainian-held territory. The problem for Ukraine is that any big building that could form a solid stronghold to halt the Russians will eventually get targeted by Russian aviation. The Russians can carry airstrikes by dropping FAB 250-kilogram bombs, then they have the regular 500-kilogram bombs. But for large buildings like industrial infrastructure, the Russians use their Su-34 fighting bombers to drop FAB 1,500 bombs. On April 9th, there was even this video of the Russian Su-25 attack aircraft reportedly firing S-8 and S-13 missiles on Ukrainian positions. We even have video evidence of Russian helicopters operating right above Chasiv Yar. In this case, they fired missiles on Ukrainian positions at this forest edge near the Canal micro-district.
Deci, ce să mai vorbim, prieteni, o grămadă de lopeți ruginite au rușeștia.
Surprise, this is exactly where the Russians attacked a couple days later. On top of that, Russian Lancets continued to carry out strikes deep inside.
Nu seturi de teren, ci Lancet, niște UAV-uri, drone.
Ukrainian-held territory, like this Ukrainian tank that was hit 5 kilometers from the front, or this one, targeted 8 kilometers away from the contact line. Meanwhile, here you can see how they proceed. A miniature Recon Zala 42112 UAV is sent ahead to find targets, and then it guides the loitering Lancet X-52 up until the target. On the 5th of April, these Russian paratroopers were getting ready for a new operation aboard their BMD-4, an amphibious infantry fighting vehicle that entered service in 2004 and that can carry up to 5 passengers. That same day, Reuters reported Ukrainians tried to hold Russians back from stronghold in east. We're very far from the articles about Syrskyi's promised encirclement of Bakhmut. With that being said, the Ukrainians fight extremely well. They don't run away despite the enemy's overwhelming firepower advantage. There's no large-scale surrender of military personnel, and their rotations are organized with detachments covering the maneuvers. The Ukrainians had just managed to bring back the front to a standstill when on the 7th of April, the 98th Airborne Division launched a double offensive. In this video, you can see the progression of Russian assault detachments within Fortăreața. That's because the Russian army advanced 600 meters, most likely through these forested areas, and established a solid foothold right at the center of the village.
They're now rushing at full speed towards the eastern...
Scuze pentru diferențele astea de sunet, dar a comentat Alex că a testat un echipament nou și le-a cam amețit.
flank of Fortăreața.
That's when the Russian telegram reported the complete fall of Fortăreața. They explained how the Ukrainians had already withdrawn their forces to the next settlement of Kalinina, where they set up new fortified positions. Once again, these reports on the fall of Fortăreața may have been premature, but Deep State UA did mark the entire village as in the gray zone, whereas according to Zodiac maps, the Ukrainians did lose the northern half of the settlement. And if things could not get worse, new Russian units were now spotted 2 kilometers away from the contact line. They now held a good chunk of these hills right north of Ivanivsky, and they were now only 300 meters away from direct control over the T-0504 road linking Ivanivsky to Chasiv Yar.
Whereas these guys right here, if they simply follow the ridge line, they will also end up on the ridge north of Ivanivsky.
At that point, the Canal micro-district was defended by units of the 247th and 251st Territorial Defense Brigades. They were most likely forming some sort of rear guard because by April 8th, most of the small houses were in ruins, and there were only a few commie blocks left that could serve as strongholds for the Ukrainians. Here you can even see a Ukrainian soldier running for cover amidst all the ruins. That's when reinforcements of Russian paratroopers were sent to clear Fortăreața. Here we see a Ukrainian rifle squad of about 9 soldiers retreating under enemy fire towards the south of the village. These must have been some of the last Ukrainian soldiers to leave the village. By the 9th of April, the settlement was declared fully secured by men of the 200th Guards Mortar Rifle Brigade. Between the 10th and the 11th of April, we witnessed the destruction of multiple Ukrainian armored vehicles in Chasiv Yar, like this T-64BV tank. This means the Ukrainians will have trouble bringing in reinforcements if the Russians do manage to create a breakthrough. We also know the direction in which the Russians plan to continue their offensive.
As you can see on the map, there are only 2 bridges directly linking Chasiv Yar to the Canal micro-district.
Here we can see a Ukrainian Humvee being struck by artillery just before reaching that bridge. But like we've seen before, attacking the Canal micro-district head-on might lead to heavy casualties. So where could the Russians attack next? The latest TOS-1 Satsepyok strike could give us the answer. As you can see, the artillery strike was geolocated right here on the map. So I think the next step of the Russian army is to capture the rest of this forested ridge. That way they can conceal large infantry units in the forest. Then they would only need to push 300 meters to storm the micro-district from the south. And surprise, surprise, this is exactly where the Russians pushed on April 12th.
It's also one of the 2 sectors where there's a clear cut in the Seversky Donetsk Canal. And pay attention to this sector, because this little path could allow dozens upon dozens of Russian armed vehicles to go from one side of the canal to the other. Meanwhile, by the 14th of April, the Russians consolidated their gains in the forest in front of the Canal micro-district.
That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis.
Analiza ta, Alex, este ca de obicei excelentă și eu vă mulțumesc vouă pentru vizionare. Pa, pa!